I'm Tim Hard with Forced Applications, and want to kind of spend some time tonight going through some different things. First of all, I'm hoping it's streaming on Facebook and YouTube. I haven't had too much trouble with that, but I've had some problems getting the Instagram live feed set up. I guess if you're on Instagram, you have to go over to YouTube or Facebook to be able to watch it. I do have some chats set up on YouTube and Facebook, and I'll try to send a message here to see if I can get someone on Instagram to check it out. Very pleased to find out here over the past couple of days I've got 10,800 followers on Instagram. There are a lot of tree guys, a lot of loggers, a lot of tree care professionals that are on there. And so I also I've had a couple videos that I want to talk about tonight and just go over some different question and answer things out there. It has to do with about 4 or 5 months ago, I posted this video and it had a little over 1 million views and a lot of questions, a lot of comments came back in. The other day, I was working on some stuff, and I said, well, I'm just going to repost this again and see. It's up over 100,000 and somewhere, well, 1.4 or something like that. Questions and the different comments have been a lot more favorable than the first ones. And I wanted to kind of discuss some of the things because a lot of people don't know about forced applications and my background and things. So I thought I would just spend tonight to kind of go through some of that. If you are an Instagram follower and you'd like to kind of stay in touch with us, the two channels on Facebook and on YouTube are just @ForestApp. So just the @ symbol and then Forest Apps. And that'll get you into those two. And then on Instagram, it is Forest Applications Training with a lower space below the 3 words. And so that's how to find us on Instagram. But anyway, I wanted to play this video in case you haven't seen it. I've had it on all the channels, but a lot of people haven't seen it. And so I'm going to see if I can get this. So this is a video that I first posted, like I say, 4 or 5 months ago, and we'll see how the sounds come across here.
The chainsaw operators over the years in logwoods that lost their life because they didn't understand a notch and a hinge. They were given the task of putting a tree on the ground. Like one guy told me, or several of them, is I don't get paid to maybe go this way or that way. I just get paid to put them on the ground, you know. And so they rush through and drop them. But a lot of times the boss is right on their tail saying, you know, you can't leave that wood on there because it's going to pull fiber on my tree. And it drops my value. And so if I'm going to pay you, you can't do that. So what do? They stay there with the tree while it's moving. If you watch a lot of times on YouTube, the guys are stating, oh, I'm gonna take a little bit more off over here. I want that tree to jack over this way. I want to do this, that, and other. Look at where the tree goes. It goes back to the face notch. If I take a side of the hinge off, the tree will turn. But how much do you take off? How much do you add on this side to pull the tree? Like if I wanted to pull this tree over, say 3 feet more to the left, how much more would I hold over here or take off over here to do it?
So if we think about that situation, talk about the different hinges and notches and how they work. Off of that video, which got more than 1 million views, and here in the past week about another 140,000 or so, is a lot of comments came back in that people West Coast, people East Coast had different ideas of first of all, me thinking that people are not professionals and that it is possible to be able to stay there with the tree and turn it and do what you need to do with it. One of them, several comments even came back this time, is what's that thing in his stomach? Well, I've been training chainsaw operations for a little over 40 years. Background with technical side, doing technical training with dealers and distributors. And then in the late 80s and early 90s, Soren Eriksson and I worked very closely together with putting together the Game of Logging training program. And then in about 2005 or so, I also was instrumental in putting together the program that's known as Arbor Master Training. And in those two programs, one for tree care and then one for logging, and then I've basically, since that time, concentrated on city, county, state disaster cleanups. About 15 years ago, I found out that I had colon cancer, and so that's kind of what the problem is there with my stomach. I had surgery and tumors removed, but there was quite a lot of area there that didn't work out quite well. And then last year I found out that it's back and also skin cancers, and so I've pretty much semi-retired, other than the video work and hopefully working to train some other instructor bases out there. At least since 1991, I've had forest applications. I've done nothing but training across the country. Trained in been through all 50 states, but I've trained in all but 3 of them. You start to think about the opportunities that I've had to meet professionals and work with different people. It's been very, very rewarding over the years. I've learned a lot from people sharing information with me. And when YouTube has started getting stronger, which my YouTube channel has been up since I think 1996, been around about as long as YouTube has. And at that time, I was really, Soren and I were really the only ones that was doing much training around the country, except for the U.S. Forest Service. And we work a lot with the U.S. Forest Service, and I've trained with West Vaco, Union Camp, Weyerhaeuser, Simpson Lumber in the West Coast, Cal Poly University, up into Gulf Canada, also all the other states, especially in the eastern side of the states. And so, I've been all over working with different professionals in operations and occupations that run chainsaws. Always promoted safety, and we've promoted sharing of techniques that can make a chainsaw operator's job easier as well as safer. And I guess the thing is that a lot of people over the years have not had the opportunity of someone sharing with them industry techniques. You've learned from somebody, from a relative or next door neighbor or some coworker, or either you read something or you watched something and you practiced it and you've gotten pretty proficient at it. Although in these two industries with chainsaw operation, it's some of the most risky and dangerous jobs that you can do. And in the logging side of it, it's rated first, second, or third, over the years as the most hazardous occupation that you can be into. That's something that's kind of kept us going. Our main purpose is to take and try to pass along techniques and planning processes that can help to reduce that. And I think we've done a pretty good job of it. But like I told somebody the other day, there's very few people that have even heard of Soren Eriksson. We also had, trainers that we work with, like Ron Hartill. Very few people have ever heard of Ron Hartill now today, but he used to be, Wide World of Sports and a logger from New Zealand that trained and traveled the country and really the world. Even back in the days with Homelight, Tournament of Kings, and Poland saws, and then later with Husqvarna, and it's something that people don't know the background of a lot of training and presentations that's taken place out there. And Soren more or less came to the United States in the late 60s and through the 70s and worked with major paper companies, and at that time was very instrumental in putting together programs with the American Pulpit Association, which is now American Forest Resources, and working with, and also we did Mead Paper. They got behind programs up in Ohio and that part of the country. We had so many different people that, I apologize for the dogs here. And so all the places that we've worked in, and Soren got started a lot of the European, Scandinavian techniques into the States. And so it was something that People don't realize where those things came from. Everybody looks at today. They don't think about the history behind a lot of things, and for that reason, I think that a lot of times we don't get the exposure or get the ability to be part of later thought processes or techniques. And we it's very hard to learn things all on our own. It's a lot easier to learn things from somebody else that works. And so I've been very fortunate and very blessed over the years to be able to make a very comfortable living working with chainsaws. And I've cut big trees, I've cut little trees, I've worked with all different facets. And so I'm just, trying to get as much of this out there as possible. Some people thought that in that particular video that loggers aren't professional, and that's by no means what that was meant to be. But all of those comments in that video come from professionals, such as maybe yourself or business owners, very frustrated with being able to get help. And sometimes production was looked at in priority to sometimes safe work practices, or maybe putting people in situations on certain sales that were not very, very easy and didn't have the properly trained people to be able to work with them. And that's the reason why a lot of the accidents and injuries were very commonplace and very, very high. And the one that I talk about there is oftentimes people don't understand the notch and the hinge and how it can work. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. There's a lot of different ways you can produce those two items with a chainsaw and a tree and get very good results out of it. But many times people don't realize how they work exactly. And so they stay there with the tree and end up with a struck by situation. And that's what that whole video was about. And if you go to the YouTube site or on Facebook also, I have the full versions of that, which is, 8 or 10 minutes or something like that explains it more. And that's another thing is that people try to watch the shorts, and they try to learn from those because, time is an essence, I guess, nowadays. But then they don't get the whole meaning of what it is. Very frustrating to creators, but it's also really bad for people trying to learn something from it because you don't see the whole meaning behind it. And I want to read through some of these things here in a minute of some of the comments that came back. If you don't understand exactly the hinge and the notch, it's very hard to be able to control things to where you want it to go and be back out of a struck by situation, because that stuff falling from above or snags around those trees that start to move, you've got to recognize those before you start to move the tree. And the whole thing with using notches and hinges for directing the tree is for what we've always called directional felling. And if you aim a tree that's going to pass another limb or another tree too close and it hangs or it breaks limbs off, that's where a lot of the struck bys come back to the stump. And so escape routes away from those situations so that you can be able to avoid a lot of those struck by injuries. And many times people try to get the tree to move because of a lean situation that more or less goes into something else, and then try to take the hinge off of it to spin it out of it or whatever, and that more or less puts you at that stump to where those struck by situations come back, or butt rebounds or barber chairs or those kinds of things take place. I can tell you from the experience that people have shared with me and I've gained on my own is that there are a lot of people out there, and whether they've been in the industry a long time or whether they're new to it, they may be excellent operators, but they don't know how to explain it. They don't know how the mechanics are working to be able to explain it. They've just found a combination that works good for them. And that's great. They've been doing it for 30, 40 years in some cases. Somebody that's starting with them new, or other situations when storms happen and the disaster groups and things come in, there's a lot of incidents that take place that are not necessary because they just need some very, basic training to be able to start forming their techniques. And so that's kind of it. Some of the questions that came in. I'll try to just kind of read down through some of these, and you can kind of form your own opinion. Plus, I want to explain a little bit about what's taking place. And these are some of the current ones. I haven't made any copies of the older ones. There was about 2,500 different comments that came back in 3 or 4 months ago, and then I think there's so far about 80 or something like that off of this one this time, off the 3 channels. But when you start to look at the actual thought processes that come in, Norm Z says this came in a couple days ago. There's more purpose behind that than just production. And some trees you have to saw off the stump to let them push through limbs or limb-locked trees or other canopies. I know because I do it too and have done it with clear purpose and intention, but I always clear my path and swamp out even extra. And I always use a Humboldt. You can absolutely use this method safely and still get away from the stump fast. Many guys just continue to stay longer. Some trees can also barber chair if not enough wood is cut. I've been cutting for 36 years. I learned from timber fallers, have a tree service, and have cut in all types of situations. I've also used and relied on methods of West Coast fallers and been told by East Coast folks we do it wrong. Guys here from the West Coast can cut trees effectively and safely here as well as in the East Coast, but the European and East Coast stuff won't work here in bigger timber. Short bars and boring everything, Humboldt cut is far safer on steep ground as well. But yes, scale and production do count too. And so, this is a very positive message to people that, he's got experience in working in larger trees. And, it's something that when you start to think through is one statement there about, the Humboldt. There's nothing wrong. I don't know why, but people think that we don't promote the Humboldt, and given a lot of help to the Forest Service and their new Sawyer's program and things like that. And one of the first things I recommended was to kind of forget about what you call it, whether it's a Humboldt, an open face, or a common notch, and think about what the notch does. And a Humboldt opened enough is great. It is great on steeper terrains where you're able to be below the face and be able to make a straight cut and then take it out of the bottom, and you can see the the back V where Dutchman's might take place, and that's great. But if you are on flat ground, West Coast or East Coast, you have to cut a higher stump and you got to bend over to be able to figure out, do you have a Dutchman? And what causes a lot of fiber pull and splitting and damage and even loss of control is not having the notch meet exact. Plus, it must be open enough to allow that tree to go until about a 70-degree position. If you have 45 degrees and you think about it, especially even if on a steep slope, is that halfway to the ground or less, the face notch closes, something has to give up. And that's the reason why we've always promoted, no matter what notch you use, you really want to think about being 70 to 90 degrees or more. And you can do that with a Humboldt. You can do that with an open face. You can do that with a common notch. And it really wouldn't be a common notch. It'd be an open face at that point. But it's something that, understanding that notch can't have any Dutchman or bypass in the back corner, because that's going to start pulling fiber. And then the other thing is that, whether you use a bore cut, that's up to, can you establish the hinge that you want on the tree? Because if you can't make it up to a bendable hinge, you're going to get pulls, you're going to get barber chairs possibly. And so whether you're limbing or whether you're falling or bucking up, notches and hinges made correctly can be used on big timber as well as small. And there's bigger trees than I have cut, there's no doubt, but I have cut some 6-foot diameter redwoods. I've cut many hardwoods, 7.5 feet across, those kinds of things over the years. Not a lot of them, but the majority of the trees is what most people are cutting on the West Coast and East Coast, and that's somewhere around 20 to 36 inches, something like that. And so you start to look at it. The notch technique, no matter how you cut it, needs to be able to allow the hinge to work. And then my determining factor, whether I just cut from the back or whether I bore cut the tree, has to do with, can I establish that hinge that I want? We talk about 10% of the diameter, which is very close to what everybody talks about on the East Coast and West Coast. And it's something that you want to be able to get to that point. If you've got a heavy forward-leaning tree, a bore cut or reducing half and half or something to be able to outcut the movement of the tree to get to the hinge is important. If not, you're going to have pulled fiber, you're going to have splitting. And then I've got videos of different things. Matter of fact, on the YouTube site, there's over 700 videos of different cuts. Whether it's big trees or little trees, it really doesn't make any difference. If the mechanics are correct, you're going to get good results. You're going to have proper placement. You're going to have less residual site damage. You're going to have a lot less damage to your logs on the tree that you're cutting. So it's, all of that comes into those understandings of the notch and the hinge that I talked about in this, short video. When you talk about long bars or short bars, that's something that's relative, because if you're in big timber, if you run a 28 to 32 inch, you're probably going to have to make more than one cut across too. So, a 16 inch bar on a 36 inch tree is possible, and a 36 inch bar on a 36 inch tree is possible. But then how many cuts are you going to make on the big tree? And I start really looking at, and Soren used to say this, think about how many limbs you have to cut and what's the diameter when you get to about the second or third log. So, that's the thing that you look about is your overall usage. I mean, if I need a big saw and a long bar, it's not heavy, but if I don't need a big saw and a long bar, it gets heavy. So that's where choice of tool also makes a big difference. I see many times on YouTube videos still today that people have a 36 inch bar on there and they're not using but a third of it. So it's just what we get used to as far as using. As far as felling, you can take 3 times the bar length pretty well, and that's what you'd have to do if you had a 10-foot diameter with a 36 inch bar. So all of that stuff is all this nitpicky stuff about what you use or how you use it. That's really something that's according to the job that you're doing. That's something to where the guys on the East Coast in large hardwoods and large pines that they're using in tree care, that they have to have big saws just like guys on the West Coast. So, but it's their ability to use them and put together a plan that's going to make them proficient and a profitable choice of tool. I agree with everything that he is saying here on this one, kind of except for that one. That has to do with, I can tell you that there are some guys on the East Coast that work with pretty large trees out there with the Forest Service and fires and things like that. And I've had, after Hurricane Hugo years ago, I had a helicopter crew working in South Carolina on some West Vaco property with Soren, and they had a heck of a time with their large saws and their West Coast techniques on large hardwood, and large pine in the East. So it's not as much East Coast or West Coast. It's who slows down and has a planning process that can put together the right choice of saw and technique to do the cut and do it well. But I can tell you this, that a big tree will kill you and a small saw will kill you. And so, a small tree will kill you. It's not the size of saw that makes a difference there. So important to to think through that. We get a mindset on things, and we forget to open up our minds and look at all the possibilities of what we can learn. Because what I always have shared, and like I said, I've made a pretty good living off of it the years, and it's not Tim Hard techniques. It's not really Soren Erickson techniques. It's putting together a plan for the task that you're doing. That's really where it comes up to. Just some things to think through there. Or my answer to one of them here was, he says, it is not for you to speak on. You're not a cutter. And I guess my statement back to him, what makes you more of a cutter than me? And, I've cut with professional loggers and tree workers all across the country, and probably out in 42 years of running chainsaws, I've cut quite a number of trees. And my statement is not my opinion, but my understanding from many that work in the professional chainsaw operations and things that have been told to me. And I can tell you one thing, that you haven't spent much time talking to other professionals if you have that kind of an attitude, because it doesn't make any difference how many hours you've got on a chainsaw. If your techniques are not pretty thorough, your planning processes and techniques, you're not going to be very productive at it. Probably end up hurting yourself or somebody else. So what he was talking about there on Norm's comments there, pushing through trees, that goes back to what I was talking about steering, directional felling. And sometimes you got very tight spots to put them, no doubt, but you don't necessarily have to cut the hinge off for them to push through. There's, some things that you can do in, separating. A lot of times in a case like that, you're going to take a heartwood out with a bore cut, no matter what, whether you're using Humboldt or a common notch or whatever. And, because you don't want any pulled fiber there in the center. And so you can leave a hinge on each side and even calculate your hinges as far as thickness and how they would break. You don't have to stay there with the tree and take it off. Those kinds of things can be set up if you understand how notches and hinges work. If you don't understand what I'm saying there, you haven't been exposed to it. So that's something for you to look at. And those kinds of information things are on YouTube and a lot of training books and things. So those are some things that you want to seek out. And the other thing too is that, I see a lot of, with Humboldt as well as even open face, guys are leaving too thick of a hinge. And what happens there is it starts to pull fiber. Well, that's the whole concept of getting that hinge down in the right proportions. And so, if you're allowing the face notch to close with much, hinge thickness there, you're going to end up in pulling fiber. I can tell you in looking at videos and from my experience is that there's a lot more pulled fiber on Humboldts than we would ever use in our logger training and logging work, because we cut lower stumps and all. And I have comments all the time about, well, your stumps are all high. Well, when we're doing training, we want higher stumps. And in most cases, like in this particular one that I showed you, they're going to take a tractor and uproot that stump, dig it up, and get it out of that parking areas where all those trees are. So that's the reason why that stump is high. Plus, it gives me the ability to put a tree over, and I've got enough elevation to show some different bucking and pressure techniques. If the tree's flat on the ground, it doesn't show these guys cleaning up storms and stuff, what pressures and compression and tension is. So those are things that in our training we usually cut higher stumps so that we can set up that for the actual bucking and limbing. And then also it's a situation of 90% of the people that we're working with don't have a lot of experience in chainsaw. It's part of their job. They're required to clean up stuff in city, county, and across roads and storms and things like that. And they don't have a lot of experience with a saw. So I try to keep them in good stances and things until they learn and get comfortable with the planning processes and techniques. And so if you don't do that, even with logging training, you're not going to have people that are going to be paying total attention to the safest cutting techniques. So those are all things that you can do. I can cut on the ground with an open face, or I can cut 3 feet high with an open face. I just try not to cut above my shoulders. So, and then in some cases with trees, you have to do that. And I see that in West Coast videos with Humboldts too. They cut the stump too high. And I've worked with a lot of high grade hardwood and lumber operations, even on the West Coast, where, the stumps were too high just because of the terrain and using Humboldt. Can't cut it as low to the ground, and be able to always match your V's with no Dutchmans and stuff. So all of that stuff starts to come through. One guy said the answer to your question is you cut it off just at the right moment so it goes where it needs to go. And see, that one definitely tells me it doesn't understand how to set up a hinge. He's just trying to reduce the pulls and the tears on the tree. And whether he's climbing with it or whether he's on the ground with it, it's important to understand how that works. Some of them here are talking about, situations that they had after cutting for many, many years, end up with an injury. And so those things are hard to look at and to realize that after all of those years and all the experience, it doesn't make much difference how much experience you have. If you miss that one little thing on that one tree in the planting process, you can end up with issues. And that one guy said stump's too high, bet he didn't bore cut, which is much safer as well. I bore cut that tree, and this is something where people are learning, some of the things of bore cuts and things like that. But it's having conversation back with somebody else, sharing it and discussing it, and don't really have the whole picture on the video. And he says, one guy says, I fix boats too. He said, go cut trees on a 45-degree slope. All I see is you making cow pastures out there. And I wrote back to him, I've cut trees in West Virginia on pretty steep slopes where we've almost had to tie ourselves on the hill. Watsonville, California, we cut some redwoods on some pretty steep slopes. I've been, all around Forest Grove, Oregon, Springfield, Oregon. I've been all over the West Coast, Cal Poly and Swanton Ranch, and some pretty big stuff. Working. We cut with students from Cal Poly. We cut with loggers in the area. We did Springfield, Oregon. We did a program years ago with Stimson Lumber. It's just, and I work in Oregon with Oregon Cutting Systems and working with some of their technical staff or sales staff. And we've cut some pretty good sized trees there. And I can tell you that the techniques do work. And it works in big trees as well as small. And some of the redwoods we cut was on a 100-year thinning that were 72 inches across the base, 153 feet tall average. And, they're not as big as some of the trees people cut. There's no doubt about it. But when you start looking at average, that's pretty good. And it would have done the same thing if they were, were 10 feet across. Just like to have a little bit bigger saw. And I listed those places, and he says, I see you haven't cut in Oregon. So I wrote back and said, yeah, Forest Grove, Bend, Portland. I work at Portland Arboretum with the city parks department, so all of those things are kind of misunderstood as people start to look on YouTube and different things, Instagram and all with the different videos that are posted. They just don't have an understanding of what the total picture is behind that. I've worked on Mount Shasta area, Klamath Falls, and Weyerhaeuser. I do have some knowledge that people have shared with me. Do I do it every day? I do training just about every day somewhere until the cancer came back. But I do training. I share information and help to pass along. And I'm a teacher. That's my background. Well, it's always been chainsaw teaching, but I feel that. I talk to a lot of loggers that aren't good teachers, but then I talk to people who have a lot of experience, but they don't know how to pass it along to other people. So that's just one of those things. So figure out how to look at those things, and not just on my videos and things, but on a lot of people's videos, they need to think about all of the things that make up that video and all. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. And then you can go on and read, the comments and things. And if you have questions about some of this stuff, and there's, like I say, there's over 700 videos on the YouTube site that can give you some ideas of how things work and how to think through it. And one thing I was going to say about the hinges, if they are too thick, that can be an issue. If they're too thin, that can be an issue. But trying to hold one side, you've got to cut the hinge off, or it has to break on one side to be able to turn a tree or pull it. And so why would you want to do that? Why not have a nice straight hinge across? If you want 3/8 of an inch, or you want 5 inches, it'd be straight across, and that way it goes to your face notch. Because I can tell you, if you're trying to steer the tree with the back side of the hinge, just look at where the tree goes. It may spin out, but look, it's going to be back in line usually. 90% of the time, unless it runs into something else, it's going to be back in line with the face notch. And so concept there is to reduce struck bys and to have better placement is to steer it where you want it to go. You've got sights on the saw you can utilize. You've got making sure your face notch is open enough to allow it. And this not only works on the ground, but also works up in the tree. I had one guy, one of the things was, well, if you had a tree that you want to cut it loose, you don't want it hanging on stuff when you're up a tree 80 feet and you've got 100 feet above you and stuff. Well, I guess he's does some tree care, he does some logging, but I don't know, from what I understand about that, maybe you've got a 180-foot tall tree and the limbs are starting on a Douglas fir or something at the 80-foot mark, and that's where he was going to drop the top off of it. I don't know whether he's in a residential area or whether he's out in the woods, but if he's in the woods and the terrain's not that bad, you can probably be better off to drop that one as one piece. Because if you go up 80 feet and drop 100 feet off the top, you're probably going to crack up some top anyway. So, it's something where all of these hypothetical situations come in. And instead of people asking questions and things, they form some type of a weird opinion. So important that we think through that. And another thing too on the hinges, I was going to say, is that if you look at the end of the log, even though it's been cleaned up, if you've cut the hinge off of it, slice you about a 1/2 inch slice across it, and then tap it and see where that breaks off. That's quite interesting. I'm going to be putting together a video on that soon, but it's even more so now. A lot of questions, with the hinge and the notch, is that if you set it up properly, you have very little damage to the usable wood for lumber or peelers. Even if you go into half the diameter of the tree, it pulls in the middle of the tree, and that's your most valuable stuff. So if you can keep it out into the waning for the mill, you have a lot less fiber damage and not as much need for trim. So just slice off about a 1/2 inch piece and see where it breaks. If you're running the hinge in there to half the diameter of the tree on a Humboldt, you're probably losing a lot more fiber than you think, because it pulls it. Even though it looks nice and straight, it's shattered there. And it pulls out of the stump, it pulls out of the log. And that's a lot of times the reason why a lot of the mills will, want a foot of trim on the logs. All that does is cost the logger quite a lot, or whoever bought the timber. So you want to think about those kinds of quality issues too. And that's where, whether you use a Humboldt or you use an open face, that allows that hinge to work, and you have less damage to the butt logs. You have control of the steering, and they work up in the tree also for limbs and also for topping and taking down pieces. So there's some things that you have to think about, like trimming the edges to keep it from peeling and those kinds of things. But it's all a very easy, understandable thing. So if you have questions, send it to me at info@forestapps.com or leave comments, and I'll try to get back to you. and try to answer questions, or I'll get you in touch with somebody who can if I can't answer it. Take the time and go through a video a couple times before you start writing all kinds of crazy things, because it makes you look pretty crazy as a professional. I know there's a lot of people on there that aren't even using saws and they put comments, but it's something to where those that do have the experience, sometimes we write things a lot quicker than our brain is working. Think about that. So I want to thank you all for dropping by. I'll look over here to see, do we have any questions? I don't see anything, but if you do have some, you can send them in to me, and I'll post this also on YouTube and Facebook, so you can take a look at it. Anyway, thank you all for dropping by, and I wish you a good sawing. And next Thursday night, plan to be back. Questions or discussions you'd like to have, just check in with me. Thanks a lot, and like I say, good sawing.